Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Evangeline, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Officer. I'd like to welcome everyone to the final webinar for the 2022 CSE's Development and Action webinar series. And today's webinar is on building climate resilience in small islands, Barbados and the Commonwealth of Dominica. And presenting today's webinar will be Dr. Claire Durant, and I'd like to extend my warm welcome to Dr. Claire. Dr. Claire is a senior climate resilience expert with the About Associates, contributing to the development of Caribbean resilient economies and sectors activities. Dr. Durant is a textbook author for Macmillan Caribbean and also a judge for the Macmillan Young Caribbean Environmental Scientist of the Year competition 2022-2023. I'm pleased to inform you that Dr. Durant is a 1992 Commonwealth Scholar from Barbados. She completed her PhD in biology from the Imperial College London. So without any further delay, I would now ask Dr. Claire to give a brief introduction and also begin with your webinar presentation. But again, if you have any questions for Dr. Claire, please do not forget to send them via the chat box and we will raise them in the Q&A session after the presentation. Dr. Claire, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to come today to hear my views on and my work in climate resilience in the Caribbean. So just the format for the webinar, we're going to have a little icebreaker, have a discussion about what climate resilience is, have an overview about climate resilience in the Caribbean, discuss my work in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Dominica is seen to become the most climate resilient nation in the world. We'll have a discussion about building climate resilience in Barbados, especially related to food security. And then we'll have a discussion about how we can engage youth and citizens in climate action. Now, this little photograph just on the side here shows vegetables and fruit from my garden. I am an avid gardener, and as a person who does gardening and also keeps poultry, climate resilience is an area that is important to me because I have been seeing the effects in Barbados. So the icebreaker to start, personal piece of climate change. How has climate change affected you personally, practically, professionally, or politically in your country? So for me, from my gardening and from the work that I do on the outside, I know that Barbados is become much more hot. So water harvesting is something that is important for persons who are gardening and trying to do their own food security. From a professional point of view, I have shifted my area of concentration from biology in the laboratory into climate resilience. And from a political point of view, we know that our Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mayor Amar Motley, has been very active on the world stage, especially on COP27, speaking about issues that affect small island developing states. So if there's anyone that wants to share their, how they have personally been affected by climate change, you can always type it in the chat box. What really is climate resilience? It's a term that is bandied about a lot now, but resilience really is the capacity to face uncertainty, the risk of shocks, and to withstand and respond effectively, and to recover and adapt in a sustainable manner. We do this in personal lives, we do this from business, perspectives. And what we are looking at is for whole countries to look at building climate resilience. The Commonwealth of Dominica and Barbados are small island developing states, and resilience starts with the individual citizens harnessing resources and their expertise and being provided with the correct knowledge so that they can build their country up. Resilience capacity can restore and strengthen and secure livelihoods, because we have to remember that individual citizens contribute to a nation and contribute to all of those things that we hear about, like gross domestic product, and we hear about moving countries forward, but that starts with the individual. And you know, from COVID, and it has affected all countries, that improving social protection for vulnerable citizens and families is very important in building resilient capacity. From a government point of view, governments have to mainstream climate to their policies, their programs, national resources, and it is important to carry out analyses so that there is data on which to build and work. Partners, which will be international partners like United Nations, Green Climate Adaptation, and then also the other institutions such as the IDB, can help to develop an effective approach with plans to respond to events. Government ministries and countries lead engagement with communities and promote resilience education, not only among citizens, but in public service and civil service officers, and support local training. And non-governmental organizations, these could be local organizations or international organizations like the Nature Conservancy or other organizations that build institutions, can contribute to building climate resilience by public information campaigns and services aimed at household and individual resilience. Now, the Climate Resilience and Execution Agency for the Commonwealth of Dominica, CREED. This agency was created after Dominica was struck by Hurricane Maria in 2017, and it has the mandate of leading Dominica's efforts to transform itself into the world's first climate resilience nation. Now, Dominica developed a climate resilience and recovery plan to operationalize its national resilience development strategy. Now, this agency is what we call a statutory organization, where it operates outside of the government ministries, but it provides technical advice and support. The plan, which is the CRRP, it is available on the web. You can go and you can have a look at it. And it really details all of the areas that the hurricane showed where Dominica was lacking when the hurricane struck. So the major climate resilience targets for Dominica, and these are in the CRRP, are enhanced institutional systems, which look at 100% of national budgeting policies in place and enforced, and a government's performance measurement framework. If you recall, I just indicated that government has to include climate in all of its policies and programs, and that is what Dominica is seeking to do. Collective consciousness is another climate resilience target, where 90% of the population is able to identify the pillars of resilience and at least one measure undertaken with specific focus on respect for people, planet, and property. And then another climate resilience target is protected and sustainably leverage natural and other unique assets. Dominica has the, the name of being the nature oil of the Caribbean, and they are seeking to transform their agriculture into basically a completely organic system. After the hurricane, there were hundreds of thousands of waste bottles and material from the agriculture sector, which were washed down into the sea and blocked the rivers. And in response to that, they are seeking to become more organic. They are also seeking to increase the healthy coral reef coverage by 50%. Dominica's major activity for that contributes to GDP is tourism, and healthy coral reefs is something that is good for that. They are also looking to become carbon neutral through 100% domestic renewable energy, and this is from geothermal sources, and increased protected forest areas. After the hurricane in 2017, the electricity was actually off in Dominica for nearly 2 years. So you could imagine living in a country and no access to electricity for that, that amount of time was quite challenging. Now, a little bit more detail about the government critical initiatives that are supporting and building climate resilience. Just here, I have a photograph from a flood that occurred in Dominica just on the 16th of November. And these floods damaged some of the infrastructure that was replaced, meaning road infrastructure and bridge infrastructure. And there is now action to even rebuild some of those areas that have been impacted. Dominica is seeking to have an enhanced social safety net initiative, and this focuses on vulnerable persons, disabled, elderly in the community, and also young people that are in the juvenile justice system and those that have to be in the children's home. The Community Emergency Readiness Initiative focuses on supporting persons in the community by getting young people to have training to understand after a hurricane what needs to be done in terms of supporting those persons who might be vulnerable, like elderly persons, so that in preparation for another hurricane which may hit Dominica, the community and the youth already know what needs to be done. A resilient housing scheme is another critical initiative. After Hurricane Maria in 2017, 90% of the houses in Dominica were damaged. The houses in Dominica are mostly of wood with galvanized roofs rather than masonry. So the majority of the houses were damaged where the roofs were removed. Kudman Dominic is another community preparedness activity which involves bringing the youth and persons in the community together to learn more about building climate resilience and also to understand how they need to prepare, not just things like having extra food in the house, but how you can secure your houses, secure outdoor areas by making sure that places where water move are not blocked by trees or debris, so that during the flooding water can um, pass freely. A resilient Dominica physical plan is being created now. It is not complete, but the physical plan is looking at the entire surface of Dominica to see how, as Dominica moves forward, where are the best places to build and put infrastructure related to homes, schools, health centers, hospitals, and things of that nature. Because Dominica is a mountainous country and the majority of the building goes on just on a narrow plain, which is close to the seaside. I have here just a link to a video which you can watch in your own time, which shows some of the devastation in Dominica from the flooding in November. Other initiatives that Dominica is engaging in relate to innovative insurance solutions. After the hurricane, many of the buildings in Dominica, private and public hotels and things of that nature, were seen to be underinsured. And with the assistance of Creed, a parametric insurance product was developed and is being sold now through banks and credit unions to allow persons to increase and improve their insurance coverage. Dominica is also seeking to become a global center for agricultural resilience. And after the hurricane, crops that are grown under the ground like yams and potatoes, those are the crops that were available for for persons to be able to feed themselves. And there are particular types of yams, potatoes, and cassavas that are what you would say like native to Dominica, and they are trying to use those to propagate more of their locally adapted crops so that they will be able to have those in case of emergency and also for the population to improve food security. They are also looking at public sector investment program, which is the government program to make sure that everything that is done is linked with climate resilience. And we know that in order to move forward, we need data, and data collection is an activity that is being put in the forefront in Dominica. They are currently doing a population and housing census so that they can collect information from citizens. Restoration of waterways and slope stabilization. Dominica is mountainous, and slope stabilization requires lots of infrastructural work, and the World Bank has actually provided money since Maria to complete some of this work. After Hurricane Maria and all of those pesticide containers and things that washed down, that it was representing such a massive problem that was highlighted, Dominica is now looking at waste management in a more holistic way, and they instituted a ban on single-use plastics in 2019. A lot of the debris, which would be things like galvanized from the roofs and cars and things like that, were compacted and exported so that they could be recycled. But Dominica is moving forward now to be more waste friendly and to be more efficient in terms of what they are doing. Now, the categories to measure resilience in the Commonwealth of Dominica focus on risk and vulnerability, financial capacity, social capacity for resilience, things like disaster response, urban development, and the natural environment. Now, the specific areas where the resilience categories were selected are the areas that all of the efforts are being concentrated, were chosen or highlighted because of what was seen when the post-disaster needs assessment was done. I was working at the FAO in 2017 when the hurricane occurred, and I was part of the team from the FAO that work on the post-disaster needs assessment. And it is important to note that when you are working on the ground, some of the things that would have been, you might have as a policy or, might have been, thought of as a good idea are not working exactly. So the risk and vulnerability, looking at social and physical vulnerability of citizens, there's like financial capabilities. After Hurricane Maria, the ability to get money and transfer money was severely affected because Dominica still has a paper-based system, and they now have a digital information strategy looking at how you can get citizens now to embrace the digital movement of money. And then things like protection of even like cultural heritage, historic buildings and cultural vulnerability was highlighted because some of the areas that were their traditional areas, where they have a population called the Kalinago, which have their own territory. Some areas were damaged, and all of these link into the protection of cultural heritage. The resilience matrix for the Commonwealth of Dominica, which I am presenting here, is just like a snapshot of some of the activities that Dominica is undertaking to build resilience into the future. So we have physical, information, cognitive, and social. So under physical resilience and looking at prevention and mitigation, I have here examples of projects that are going on. So we have, for example, the construction of an international airport. You might say initially, well, what does construction of an international airport have to do with, physical resilience and prevention and mitigation in the Commonwealth of Dominica? After the hurricane, Dominica has a small airport, and no large airplanes could land in Dominica. The large airplanes that bring the food, bring the materials that were required in Dominica. Those large airplanes had to land in Barbados, and then all of those materials then transported to Dominica in smaller airplanes or by sea using boats. So for the future, in order to support Dominica, they require an international airport that could, take large airplanes so that materials could be brought in. And, if people want to travel out, they can travel out. After the hurricane, Dominica has significant outmigration because of the situation there. If we look, say now at physical and response, Dominica now is looking at establishing emergency operations center, not just in Roseau, but also in outlying communities, and also looking at construction of disaster relief warehouses so that in the event of a disaster, all of the resources are not concentrated in Roseau, but are spread out to other areas in the country. The resilience mapping also relates to geography, and I just have a map here of Dominica showing that the little red dots on the map show the locations of some of those projects that I was mentioning in the resilience matrix. And resilience maps from a geography point of view can help planners to see where projects are being located relative to housing settlements so that they can be placed in an area that can assist communities. So let's just have a look now at building climate resilience in Barbados. And I'm just gonna let the video go so you can see here.
The water rushing off the road there, brother.
And that is the voice of a farmer who, as you can see, all of his crops, all of his money, and all of his effort is being washed away, leaving him and some of his other colleague farmers destitute. Because when farmers experience things like flooding, and all of their, the monies that they would have put into seedlings and irrigation and pumps are all washed away because of floods of that nature, despite the infrastructure that is available in the roads and things like that, and the wells to prevent flooding. These are the challenges that are being experienced in Barbados and Dominica as we speak, and they are becoming more frequent. Now, when compared to the 30-year climatological average, Barbados' annual rainfall is actually falling. But then we have situations, and this occurred in November, where then you have extreme flooding and farmers then are severely affected. Along with the flooding, even this year, we had a situation in September and October where we had heat waves, and more than 3,000 chicken farmers, these are small chicken farmers, use pens with galvanized roofs, and that can reach nearly 42 degrees in the midday sun, and that causes the death of the chicks. If you know anything about poultry, it cannot get too hot in the chicken pen, and these are small farmers. We are not farming in wind tunnels or anything like that. Now, in order to build climate resilience in Barbados, it is important to improve sustainability of farming through water security and the use of drought-tolerant crops, soil conservation, and management. We are also looking at promoting climate-smart technology for increased efficiency and solar renewable energy for pumping water, and also any activity to do with farming, like drying onions or solar for the vehicles that the farmers use. Knowledge management and capacity building is integral in Barbados's thrust to build climate resilience, where extension officers and persons from the Ministry of Agriculture who go out and teach the public and teach the farmers how to improve their farming despite all of the challenges of drought and heat waves. That is another area that we are having a thrust. I have a link here for a speech from our Prime Minister of Barbados, who, at COP27 highlighted the challenges that are being experienced in Barbados, and then also noting that accessing financing to support climate resilience is challenging, and that the world, the World Bank and the IMF and those large organizations need to come together and reduce the amount of interest that is charged to small nations, and also contribute to a fund apart from the Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund, so that we would have access to more resources. With particular emphasis on water harvesting in Barbados, as I indicated before, we are beset by droughts and then floods and droughts and floods. Just on the right hand side of the screen, you see an image here of what was a natural pond that farmers would use to irrigate their crops. And one of the projects that I worked on was increasing water storage from the original pond, from 3,800 meters cubed to 72,000 meters cubed. And you can see the difference here. There's a much larger availability of water, which then is piped to farmers so that they can do their, they can grow their crops more comfortably. And it also was designed to help with the flooding. Building climate resilience also involves best practices in agriculture. And the photo here just on the right shows a pesticide container trailer for farmers, where when they are finished with their containers, they throw them into this disposal trailer, and then the ministry collects them and shreds them for appropriate disposal, so that farmers will not just, dispose of them in the regular ways or burn them on the outside. Farmers are being encouraged to use biological pest control, reduce their pesticide and herbicide use, and use ground covers, including plastic, mulch, leaves, and things of that nature. We have been also looking to establish beehives on farms to support the increased pollination of the popular cucurbits like, cucumbers and pumpkins and squash that are cash crops for farmers. Barbados, if you didn't know it, is the actual home of grapefruit. If you look us up in the encyclopedia, you would see that grapefruit actually originated in Barbados. And we have many different types of citrus here. And we had, over the last few years, bouts of citrus greening disease. And the Ministry of Agriculture is now seeking to revive citrus groves and really preserve the unique biodiversity of locally adapted shaddock. Shaddock is a cross between a grapefruit and something called a pomelo. And yeah, this is the picture here is a picture of the shaddock. And then we have other citrus, which are like bumpy lemons. Inside it's a lemon, but the skin is really bumpy, but these are locally adapted. Barbados now imports nearly $1 million in citrus, meaning oranges, lemons, limes, yearly. And if we are able to propagate our own citrus and make it into a larger industry with large orchards, then we will be able to even reduce that importation. And importation of any fruit or vegetable contributes to the carbon dioxide going into the air. Barbados is also looking to build climate resilience by looking at a national carbon credit initiative. Barbados's main industry is tourism, and we get, before COVID, 2 to 3 million visitors a year, both by air and by sea. And the establishment of a national carbon credit initiative partnership is seeking to offset emissions from transatlantic tourists by using revenues generated through airline passenger donations to fund tree planting, where, for example, if we look at the table here, if a tourist was willing to pay $100 to plant a special variety of a tree, and including the cost of maintaining it for 30 years, and 20% of visitors were willing to do that, that would generate about $6.8 million per year, using 2019 as a reference. Or if 40% of visitors were willing to do, to pay $100, then that would generate, a certain amount of money. Now, in addition to planting special varieties, meaning things like mahogany, which would, like timber products, or other types of what you would say like botanical trees or flowering trees. And we were going to fund, say, planting a local variety tree, just like a fruit tree, like the same citrus. That would be, the cost would be much less. The cost will be much less. So this is something that is being pursued. Looking at the National Carbon Credit Initiative, we determined that an agroforestry approach to increase tree cover and build the resilience of agricultural soils would be the best way, and local fruit production would reduce fresh fruit imports. So if we look at starting with 963 acres, Barbados is a very small island. We are only 11 miles long and 10 miles wide. So we are only like 100,000 acres. If Barbados was to seek to do the carbon credit initiative using 963 acres, the tons of carbon over 30 years with an estimate would be 156,000 tons. And if we were able to do 8,000 acres, then we would get about 1.2 million tons of carbon taken out of the air. Now, in order to engage youth in climate change and in climate action, I do a lot of volunteer work, and just this year and last year, I was able to be, I was fortunate to be an awardee for the Royal Society of Chemistry, Inclusion and Diversity Fund. And the project that we are looking at is looking at building diversity and inclusion across Black teenagers to inspire them to participate in chemistry, look at links between food, fossil fuel, combustion, and climate action, because we know when we eat food, food produces carbon dioxide, not only in its, use in the body, but also when it is produced. Fossil fuels are contributing to the carbon in the air from burning, in vehicles and in industry. And this project is looking to engender deeper understanding of chemistry and show Black chemists, to the younger generation, because we know there's a dearth of Black chemists working in the industry. And then just finally, as Eva said at the beginning, I am I'm a judge for the Young Caribbean Environmental Scientist of the Year competition in 2022-2023. I'm a textbook author with Macmillan, and this project is all over the islands in the Caribbean, and students are being encouraged to research and come up with a project to combat climate change and its impact. And at the end of the project, we will, determine who is the winner, and then we will highlight and support the project that the students have determined that has been adjudged the winner. So in summary, climate change impacts are being felt in Dominica and Barbados, and building climate resilience in SIDS is focusing on prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and rehabilitation. And the critical initiatives look at social safety, agricultural best practices, and infrastructure. And both governments and citizens are partners in the effort. And looking to the future, all initiatives have to be sustainable. Youth involvement is vital. Education and training, and governments all have to integrate climate priorities into government policy. So thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Claire. That was a brilliant webinar presentation. And yes, There are quite a few questions coming through in the chat box, and but to summarize, it was really great to listen to your webinar topic and your presentation on the, especially the resilience matrix that the Commonwealth of Dominica is working on at the moment, as far as you know, an action to mitigate climate resilience, or sorry, climate change, and also for sharing your work in engaging youth into climate action. So yeah, thank you so much for your webinar. Once again, if the attendees would like to ask any questions, please send them via the chat box. We do have a few questions that you have already sent via the registration form, so thank you so much. I will address some of them, and I'll also go through the questions in the chat box. So Claire, if you're ready, I would like to ask the
Yes.
first question. Great. So my first question is, how do small islands maximize sustainable financing for the biodiversity conservation?
Well, certainly, in maximizing financing, we have the debt for nature swaps, and Barbados was just this year, between the IDB, the IMF, and the Nature Conservancy have actually started to have a debt for nature swap, so that funding is being provided. I believe it is $100 million in funding is being provided to reduce some of Barbados's debt, and then that funding then is going to be used for conservation activities in Barbados. But certainly you can, you can look up debt for nature swaps for Barbados, and you will see the complete details of the agreement.
Thank you for your response, Claire. The next question is by Garfield, and the question is, how is Dominica funding this comprehensive program? And they're referring to the matrix that you were discussing in one of your slides. So the question is, how is Dominica funding its comprehensive program for building climate resilience? And also, what matrix is used to determine the country's position in the league table of climate resilience?
Well, Dominica, after Hurricane Maria, Dominica received significant amounts of donations from the international community, and all of that funding has not yet been spent. And you say, wow, like 2-3 years have gone. Dominica is a small country, and they have very few technical, they do not have adequate technical resources, persons there in Dominica. Remember, I spoke about significant outward migration. So they do not have all of the resources there to be able to spend even all of the funding to complete everything that is required. So that's why they have lots of consultants coming in, and work is going as fast as it can. But there are challenges with human resources, and remember, all of the materials that are needed for infrastructure and have to be imported into Dominica. Now, with regard to additional funding, Dominica has a Citizens by Investment program, and you can look it up. The Citizens by Investment program allows international persons basically to buy a Dominica passport, and it is in different categories, up to $7 million. And the funding from that economic Citizens by Investment program is used to support activities in Dominica. With regard to like the classification or the league, I am not certain how that is being done. So I would have to say I'm uncertain about with regard to the, where Dominica falls in that league. I'm not certain. That is something I will have to research.
Thank you so much, Claire. And it's quite interesting to understand, the spending of the donations and funds received. And again, if attendees would like to get in touch with Dr. Claire to understand the in-depth analysis of the matrix, please feel free to do so. I really found it very interesting to understand the examples that Dr. Claire was sharing through the matrix. So yeah, please do get in touch with Dr. Claire to get more information on the matrix. All right, the next question is, as part of building climate resilience, does Barbados have any anticipatory measures? And also, how do the early warning systems relay information to the right consumers of information, such as the farmers, humanitarian agencies, and policymakers?
Okay, well, let's start with the early warning system. The Caribbean Meteorology and Hydrology Institute has an early warning system with regard to, weather. So it has like a drought monitoring index, a heat index, and farmers themselves can, go to their website and see the predictions for the weather on the daily, monthly, quarterly, and even yearly basis. With regard to policymakers, the information is collected by the Ministry of the Environment and National Beautification, and that is shared with policymakers. With regard to humanitarian partners, we have in Barbados just the Red Cross and the Salvation Army as humanitarian partners. And we do have a national disaster organization that provides information to the public and the policymakers. And that information, in case of, an impending disaster, which could be, a storm coming or a hurricane, or how earlier last year we had ashfall in Barbados, the volcano in St. Vincent erupted and Barbados was blanketed in ash for 2 days. Our day turned to night. That information then is relayed to the public through social media, text messages, and television, in order to let you know how to prepare for disasters. Remind me what the first question was, the first part of the question.
Yes, so the first part of the question is, as part of building climate resilience, does Barbados have anticipatory measures?
Anticipatory measures. We have anticipatory measures if you count anticipatory measures as things like improving breakwaters to prevent, say, the sea overtopping and damaging hotels. We have infrastructure measures such as, when we know it's the hurricane season, you would have additional drain cleaning, well cleaning, and things of that nature. And then also we are part of the Caribbean Disaster Risk Insurance Facility, where the government, we as a nation purchase insurance, so that in addition to the insurance available by individual citizens or individual businesses, then there is a disaster fund that we contribute to so that then we would receive money that could help nationally.
That's really great response, Claire. And you mentioned about the volcano in St. Vincent and how that affected Barbados.
Yes.
We also had a webinar last year by one of the Commonwealth alumnus who is a volcanologist and did work with, when the volcano erupted and the effects. So yeah, the webinar recording is available on CSE's YouTube channel. So if anyone is interested, please go have a look. That was a really great shout out, Dr. Claire. And yeah, it reminded me of the webinar. So thank you so much for discussing that. All right. So the next question is, I hope I'm not missing on any questions. All right. So the next question is, seems like most of the resilience measures dovetails towards net zero and economic resilience. So as a nation is very susceptible to climate-induced sea level rise, how is the nation building capacities to mitigate this issue?
Well, sea level rise is, that is such a complex issue, because both in Barbados and in Dominica, we are using the area which is just right close to the seaside for the majority of activities. The city is there, the tourist hotels are there, all of the buildings are there. So when we talk now about, say, for example, building breakwaters or, building infrastructure to prevent the sea from coming in, many of those infrastructures can affect the beaches, even though they are built as best as they can affect beaches. And the beaches are what, a lot of tourists, are coming to utilize. So sea level rise also impacts, especially for a country like Barbados, where our our rock is limestone, which means that it is porous. Our aquifers are in limestone rock, which is porous. When you have sea level rise, the water, which is salt water and brackish water, because of the limestone, that salt water reduces the interface between the fresh water and the salt water, meaning that the level of the aquifer where we can draw water from for our drinking water is reduced. So we dealing with sea level rise is a complex problem, because all of the years we have utilized the areas close to the sea in a certain way, and the infrastructure needed to address sea level rise is some of the most expensive some of the most expensive infrastructure that there is out there, and that's why we need more resources to address it.
Great. So we still have one more question in the chat box. So we also have a few minutes remaining. So the next question is, as part of building climate resilience, does Barbados encourage and promote using nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge?
Traditional nature-based solutions. Well, I would say that yes, this is, nature-based solutions and ecological knowledge is something that is being promoted more, in that we are trying to move away from, what we discussed just now, which is just, tourists with the sand and sea, and promoting more, what we would say like inland tourism and community tourism, where tourists there would visit, communities inland. They would also do things like, like hiking, like trail walking, and then be introduced to traditional foods and traditional medicine and things of that nature. And this is something that our Barbados Tourism Marketing Incorporation is working on now, but it is not something that Barbados has done traditionally. But now, because of all of the changes the world over, these things are being promoted more.
Thank you so much, Dr. Claire. If you have some time, I do have one final question to ask, if that's all right with you.
Yes.
Great. So the question is, how does Barbados policy support the dynamic nature of climate change in terms of technological transfer and reducing social vulnerability?
Technological transfer. What when you say technological transfer, what are you specifically meaning when you say technological transfer?
That's a good question. I'd like the attendee who has asked the question, perhaps to specify in the chat box.
Yes, basically what I'm asking is, she made mention of that there is a gap, there's an issue with respect to specialists coming into Barbados to actually support them with regards to having a holistic measure, because Barbados, they are facing a problem with specialists, so they do not have the capacity in terms of specialists.
Yes.
They have to bring in the specialists from outside Barbados.
Yes.
So basically,
Yes.
how are they actually coping with that with respect to the changing nature of climate change?
Well, a lot of the funding, if you're getting, say, funding from the IDB or World Bank or, CDB, and we have technical specialists who, come in to assist in particular areas. There's the specialists or the consultants, when they are doing their work, they would have persons, say like public officers from the ministries who would be working alongside them. And when they have completed their reports, then we always ask for, like what would say capacity building, so that some of their, their expertise is, left in the public service in the particular ministry, so that we are gaining, knowledge, and we can always try to find, some of the solutions to our problems ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for clarifying your question, and thank you, Claire, for responding. So with this, I now come to the end of this webinar. Thank you so much for all the questions that came through in the chat box and also in the registration forms. But as I said, if I missed out on any questions, please do get in touch with Claire. Claire, if you can please move to the next slide. I think your contact details are on the next slide. Yep, there you go. So please feel free to get in touch with Claire. That's her email address and also her LinkedIn profile link. If you have any questions, if you're working in a similar workspace on climate change, resilience, if you're from the Caribbean and would like to get in touch with Dr. Claire, please feel free to connect with her and connect with her via email or LinkedIn. So Claire, would you like to say a few final words or summarize your webinar presentation before we close the webinar?
I would just like to say thank you for, participating and hearing the work that I have done in climate resilience. And I would say that we are all partners in building climate resilience in our own nation, and each one has a little contribution they can make. So